Yo, what's good with y'all? Hope y'all had a Merry Christmas, and if you don't celebrate, Happy Holidays. In this video, I'm going to show y'all how to arrange your beats so it's easy for artists to rap on it. So I'm not going to say too much else, so let's just jump right into FL Studio. So starting off with the beginning of the beat here, or the intro, typically this will be between 8 and 16 measures. Usually the intro will just be like the plain sample just with a couple sounds playing, and that will build up into the hook or the chorus, which is basically just the repeating part in the lyrics. This won't have a lot of substance when it comes to adding the drums and all that. You can either leave this blank for the most part, or you can just start the beat straight in the chorus or the hook. For example, a lot of beats that Wheezy makes, it just goes straight into the chorus, or if it is an intro, it's a very short one. In this beat, I ended up making an intro that was a little bit longer, so 16 measures total. Kind of started with the bare bones sample right here, and then it went into the busier part of the sample. Another alternative way that I could do this intro is I could just delete all the drums and just have the bare bones sample, and then go into the part of the sample that has the sub bass that's a little busier. And then from there, it can transition into the hook where I bring in all the drum sounds. And that would sound something like this. So that kind of squares away the intro. For the most part, you can kind of just do whatever you want with it. You can make something that leads in for a little bit, but don't make the intro too long, because most times if you're going to send this out to a lot of sound engineers, they don't even play the beat for more than 8 or 10 seconds. So you don't want to make your intros like 40 seconds long. I'd say the longest you'd want to make these is about 15 to 30 seconds at most. Ideally, the sooner the beat you can start it is probably the better. So once I had the intro down, I put in the first hook or chorus, and usually you can leave this to about 8 to 16 measures as well. And I think this probably works the best if you leave it pretty close to the intro. So for this hook, you can see that this is one of the busier sections of the sample, and it also contains all the drum sounds that I have in the entire playlist. The hooks are typically the busiest part of the beat. You're going to have the busiest part of the melodics and also most of the samples. By busy, I mean it's going to have the most different elements to it, so the most amount of drum sounds paired with the most amount of melodics, which makes sense because it's going to be paired with the simpler lyrics from the artist. So just by itself, this is what the chorus to verse sounds like. So now moving into the verse, typically you want to make these a little longer than your choruses, just because lyrically these also tend to be a little bit longer in length. So if you go onto Genius or any other lyric websites, you'll notice that the verses are a lot longer. Typically these will be 16 measures or more. Me personally, I like to leave these between about 16 and 24 measures, because you don't want the beat to kind of drag on for too long without having a hook or without having some sort of switch up. For the verses, this has most of the drum sounds, but as a bit of a switch up, I'll change up the melodics a little bit from the sample. So I'll add another element to it in the second half of the verse, or kind of towards the end of the verse, and also switch up the drum sounds a little bit, take some out, maybe take out some of the snare rolls or the hi-hat rolls. You can simplify the drums a little bit, but overall this part of the beat needs to be less busy. You need to have less sounds going on, because it's going to crowd it too much and it's going to be hard to rap on or to be able to write lyrics over. So kind of going back to the purpose of having your chorus or your hook, you want that to be a little bit more complicated, because the lyrics are going to be simpler, and since the lyrics are going to be more complex in the verse, you want that to be a little bit more condensed in terms of the amount of sounds that you have, and also keep it fresh for the artist so that it doesn't get too boring or it doesn't drag out for too long to the point where it feels a little bit too static and it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere for a while. So in this beat specifically, the first part of the verse didn't have the vocal, but it had more drum sounds. And then for the second half of the verse, I brought back the vocal, but I cut the kick and the open hat out. So after the verse, I added a bridge and kind of transitioned it into a verse back into another hook. Typically your bridge will be a little bit past halfway or about 2/3 of the way into the song. A lot of times it'll also happen towards the end, and usually you do something like this so that you have a bit of a switch up in the beat and it just kind of refreshes it. The artist can kind of do their thing a little more because usually bridges have more space compared to hooks, and it also just keeps interest within the listener too. Bridges can also kind of act like pre-choruses, so they can also build anticipation. In this specific beat, it's kind of a bridge that somewhat transitions into a verse, which slowly kind of leads back into the second to last hook. And you might be asking yourself what consists of a bridge. This is kind of similar to an intro to an outro, where you kind of take back some of the elements and you just add some more space to it, or you add some sort of filter to the melodies. You can add EQ automation where you bring down the high end and it kind of makes that underwater sort of effect. You can also just have the plain sample by itself playing with an 808 or just a couple drum sounds or whatever it may be. Overall, the bridge of the beat is supposed to sound a little different compared to everything else, but the bridge going back into the next verse sounds something like this. And then after this hook, I just have in another verse. It's pretty similar to the first verse in terms of the number of drum sounds and which stems I ended up using. And then after the verse, I threw in an outro, which is pretty similar to a normal bridge. Usually this will just be a toned down version of the verse with maybe a little bit of different stems, or a lot of songs will just throw in the hook again and then fade out the volume. So for example, if I had the hook here and I wanted to just fade it out, what I'd do is I'd hold right click and just highlight all of this right here. I just go to the master track in the mixer, go to the volume slider, right click on it, and then hit create automation clip. And then once I get this right here, I just take this endpoint and drag it all the way down, and then go to the middle here and then raise the tension up a little bit just so that the decrease is a little more gradual. And that's a pretty common practice in a lot of arrangement. It's not absolutely necessary. So long as it kind of gradually tones down from the rest of your track, I think it should be just fine. As for the overall length of your beats, you don't want them to be too short and you don't want them to be too long. In terms of the overall length, I personally like to keep mine within about 2 to 3 minutes, unless there's a specific request for something shorter or longer. And if you feel like you've arranged it as much as you'd want it to and it's a little bit too short, what you can do is you can just go to where your hook to verse series is, and then you just shift click and then bring it over once again. And then this way you just kind of add another section to the song. It's almost like as if you're just adding another verse and then possibly use your hook as an outro, or you can just add another hook at the end after your verse and then that will be your outro. Pretty similar to the whole hook to verse thing. Play around with the overall spacing of your drums too. What I like to do with the hi-hats to make sure they don't get too boring is I like to go into the middle of them here, and then after claps I'll just cut out the remainder until the next measure starts. So I'll just cut out about 2 beats here or half a measure, and I like to do this at the end of the 4th measure of the drum patterns or the 8th measure as well. And also to spice it up, what you can do is if you're going back into a hook or if you're going into an outro, for example, what you can do is you can cut out the first 2 of your 8-bar pattern. That way it builds a little bit of suspense or anticipation for the drums to come back in. But do use this kind of sparingly, because if you use this a lot in your beat, it might throw off the artist that's trying to write to it. You can also do this where you leave just one drum sound in and then all the rest of them come in on the 3rd measure. And then you can also add like a riser or some sort of transition effect so that it just comes in a little cleaner. Also, use transition sounds in your beats, mainly between the different parts of your beats and the hook, and also if you're transitioning just between majorly different parts. For example, if I'm going from a hook to a bridge, that's a lot different. You want to use a transition sound. You can use sound effects, anything that really jives with you, and honestly, you can kind of just liken it to your own style and just do whatever you'd like. Also, a last tip is if you piece your whole beat together and you put your headphones on or you're listening to it and you just kind of have it on in the background, you're not super conscious of it, it might be hard to kind kind of pick up on errors. When you're done with the beat, kind of go back and listen to at least one cycle of the beat, being your intro, hook, verse, and make sure that it kind of flows all together. You can definitely hear an artist on it. And also listening to music, being conscious of the arrangements that they use also help in figuring out how to arrange your beats. So I guess the main takeaways are know how to structure your beats in terms of which part goes where. The second being your overall sound selection and adding transitions, making sure that your drums don't get too boring, add different variations where they're needed. And the last being make sure to do your research, see what the types of artists in the specific field or beat that you're using, what types of patterns they use, and how those producers try to arrange their beats. Don't make anything too long, make sure it's not boring. Treat your beats like you're going to listen to them as a first-time listener, and if you follow those, I think you should be in pretty good shape. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. If you have any recommendations for me, I just made a Google form for video recommendations. I'll leave that in the link in the description and the pinned comment. And that's going to be it for me, so I'll see you on the next one. Peace.